The silence of the archives was not the absence of sound. Florence Dubois had long understood, but a specific heavy pressure, like the earth itself pressing down on the oldest strata of forgotten knowledge. Florence, at ***, 33 *** years of age, a Thufi librarian of the most recondite texts, perceived these subtle gradations of quietude as a cartographer might discern elevation changes in an ancient, unmapped land. Her domain, the subterranean vault of the Arkham Historical Society, was a labyrinth of steel shelves and hermetically sealed display cases, holding paper artifacts whose very fragility seemed to amplify the ambient stillness. Today, however, a new texture had woven itself into the accustomed hush, a thin, almost imperceptible hum, a resonance that vibrated not in her ears but in the bone of her skull, a persistent, low frequency that felt like the sustained note of a colossal, unseen instrument. It was an intrusion, a foreign body in the sacred quiet, and it unsettled her with a precise intellectual disquiet. Her only companion, a calico named Clio, usually a creature of profound somnolence, was now perched atop a stack of oversized folios, her tail twitching with an uncommon, almost agitated rhythm, her gaze fixed on the furthest, most lightless corner of the vault. Florence tracked Clio. Attention, her own eyes, accustomed to the low, luxe environment, scanning the stacks. The hum seemed to originate from that direction, a direction housing the Society's most esoteric collection, the private papers of long, deceased scholars obsessed with fringe sciences and forgotten mythologies. Florence dismissed the sound as an HVAC anomaly, a failing bearing in a distant fan, yet the thought felt hollow even to her own rigorous mind. Clio, a creature of pure instinct, continued her vigil, her pupils dilated to obsidian pools, her fur ruffled with a static charge Florence could almost taste on the air. A faint, almost imperceptible scent began to unfurl in the air, a peculiar amalgamation of ozone and something else, something metallic and desiccated like sun-baked bone dust mixed with the faint, acrid taste of an electrical burn. It was a smell that seemed to defy the vault. Meticulous environmental controls, an olfactory ghost in the controlled atmosphere. Florence rose from her high, backed chair, the rustle of her tweed skirt a jarring rupture in the imposed quiet, and began to move towards the source of Clio, a fascination her brogues making no sound on the polished concrete floor. As she drew closer, the hum intensified, shifting from a pervasive thrum to a more distinct, vibrating drone. It was a sound that seemed to distort the very air around it, making the visual field waver at its edges, a subtle, almost subliminal distortion. The scent, too, grew more pronounced, now carrying a hint of something organic, something tawny oily and vaguely putrescent, an odor that spoke of decay, but not of the familiar biological sort. It was a chemical decomposition, a molecular unraveling. Florence reached the section marked P for paranormalia in the archaic cataloging system, Fuji, and paused. The air here was noticeably cooler, a pocket of frigid isolation amidst the vault, S-regulated warmth, a localized anomaly that raised the minute hairs on her forearms. Clio, now on the floor, was pressed against the bottom shelf, emitting a low, continuous purr that sounded less like contentment and more like a resonant, internal tremor. Her small head was thrust into the narrow gap between the shelf and the wall, her tail lashing slowly, deliberately. Florence knelt, her knees protesting slightly against the cold floor. The shelf contained a series of bound journals, their leather covers cracked and flaking, their paper edges brittle with age. One particular volume, thick and unwieldy, seemed to be the focal point of the anomaly. Its spine, usually a dull, faded brown, now possessed a faint, almost internal luminescence, a soft, pulsating glow that seemed to emanate from within the very fibers of the leather. The hum was strongest here, a resonant vibration that made the tiny bones in her inner ear ache. She could feel the cool air radiating from the book, a palpable localized emanation of cold that defied all physical explanation. Her fingers, usually precise and confident, hesitated before touching the volume. The Forthingfusent was strongest, now clinging to the air around the book like a miasma, a testament to some strange slow effluvium. Logic, her lifelong anchor, began to fray at the edges, dissolving into a nascent, intellectual dread. This was no HVAC malfunction, no forgotten chemical spill. This was something else entirely, something that mocked the very principles of her ordered, rational world. She reached out, her fingertips brushing against the cover. The leather was surprisingly suppler, almost warm, despite the radiating cold. But beneath the warmth, there was a strange internal vibration. as if something within the book itself was alive, humming with a suppressed energy. The faint luminescence brightened fractionally under her touch, casting an ephemeral sickly green sheen on her skin. Clio let out a sharp, truncated meow, a sound of alarm rather than affection, and retreated several paces, her fur bristling along her spine. Florence withdrew her hand, a peculiar residue clinging to her skin, not a physical substance, but a sensation, an echo of the book, its internal vibration, a phantom thrumming that now seemed to resonate within her own bones. The air around the shelf began to shimmer, not like heat rising, but like a faulty projection, the very fabric of the space momentarily losing its cohesion. The hum now had a distinct rhythm, a pulse, and Florence, for the first time in her life, felt the solid ground of her intellect begin to buckle under the weight of an impossible, undeniable reality. The residual thrumming in Florence's metacarpals persisted, a phantom tremor that seemed to travel through the marrow of her bones, an internal echo that mocked the external silence of the vault. The air around the anomalous volume continued its subtle undulation, a visual distortion that suggested a localized warping of atmospheric pressure, or perhaps perception itself. Florence, a woman whose life had been dedicated to the objective classification of information, found her established cognitive frameworks dissolving. The phenomenon defied every principle of physics, every known law of matter and energy. Clio, having retreated to a safer distance, now sat hunched, her fur still erect, her gaze fixed with an unwavering intensity on the shimmering space, a low guttural trill vibrating in her throat, a sound Florence had never before associated with the usually placid feline. It was a sound of primal apprehension, a creature's instinctual warning against an encroaching, incomprehensible threat. Florence noted this data point with a detached corner of her mind, even as the core of her intellect struggled to recalibrate. The book, still resting on the shelf, pulsed with its internal sickly green light, a slow, deliberate rhythm that mirrored the phantom thrum in her hand. Florence extended her hand again, this time with deliberate intent, her fingers hovering inches from the volume's spine. The cold emanating from it was no longer merely localized. It now seemed to draw warmth from the surrounding air, creating a small circular vortex of frigidity that made the ambient humidity crystallize on the nearby metal shelves. Microscopic ice crystals, visible only when caught by the faint, internal glow of the book, formed and dissipated in a continuous cycle, a silent, ephemeral dance of solid and gas. The peculiar, the scent intensified, now carrying a distinct undertone of something metallic, like superheated copper, an olfactory signature of impossible chemical reactions. Florence observed these phenomena with a clinical detachment, her intellectual curiosity overriding the nascent fear that attempted to breach her composure. She needed more data. Her training demanded it. She leaned closer, her breath momentarily fogging the air around the book, then dissipating instantly into the frigid pocket. The pulsating green light seemed to accelerate its rhythm, a slow, deliberate beat becoming a quickening throb, a signal of increasing activity. The vibration in Florence's bones deepened, resonating through her entire skeletal structure, a systemic hum that felt as if her very atoms were being subtly retuned. The visual distortion around the book expanded, stretching outwards from the shelf like an invisible membrane, encompassing the adjacent volumes, causing their rigid spines to waver and blur as if viewed through heat haze. Clio, now fully agitated, began to rake her claws against the concrete floor, a sharp, rasping sound that was shockingly loud in the profound quiet of the vault. She then launched herself onto a higher shelf, positioning herself to observe the anomaly from above, her tail lashing with renewed vigor, her ears flattened against her skull. Florence understood the cat's actions as an instinctual withdrawal from an immediate ground-level threat, a strategic repositioning in the face of the unknown. The book, no longer merely pulsating, now emitted a low, resonant drone, a sound that seemed to bypass her auditory canals and vibrate directly within the fluid of her inner ear, creating a disorienting pressure. Florence knew, with a certainty that transcended mere intuition, that the book was not merely an object, but a conduit, a focal point for something operating outside the established parameters of her reality. She reached out, her fingers closing around the cold, surprisingly pliant leather of the volume. The moment her skin made full contact, the hum intensified to an almost unbearable pitch, a high-frequency scream that seemed to tear at the fabric of the air itself. The green light flared, bathing the entire section of the vault in its sickly luminescence, revealing the fine dust motes dancing in the charged atmosphere. A sensation, not of heat or cold, but of immense, internal pressure bloomed within her head, a feeling akin to deep-sea decompression sickness, where the very structure of her skull seemed to flex under an invisible force. Clio, let out a distressed yowl, a sound of pure, unadulterated distress, and fled, a blur of calico fur, disappearing into the deeper recesses of the vault. The book in Florence's hand grew heavier, impossibly so, as if its internal density were rapidly increasing, compressing its mass into an infinitesimal point. Its surface, once merely cool, now radiated an intense, dry heat, a sensation that contradicted the surrounding frigidity, burning against her palms without causing physical blistering. The leather began to subtly shift, its texture becoming fluid, almost viscous, as if the very molecules composing it were in a state of continuous rearrangement. A series of minute, almost imperceptible tremors coursed through the vault floor, a low tectonic groan that vibrated up through the soles of Florence's brogues. The air, already charged, began to crackle with an audible static, a sharp, snapping sound that punctuated the high-pitched drone. Florence's vision blurred at the periphery, the precise lines of the shelves and books wavering, her perception of depth and distance becoming momentarily unreliable. The objective world, the structured reality she meticulously categorized, was fraying at its edges, a tapestry unraveling under the influence of the anomalous volume. She attempted to release the book, but her fingers, though not physically restrained, seemed to have lost the capacity for voluntary separation. A strange, almost magnetic adhesion held her to the object, a biological lock that defied her will. The internal pressure in her head escalated, now accompanied by a peculiar taste in her mouth, a sharp, metallic tang reminiscent of blood and old pennies, a flavor distinct from the footy, oily scent that still permeated the air. The green light pulsed faster, its intensity growing, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed and contracted with a life of their own, independent of any external light source. Florence, the meticulous librarian, felt her control over her own somatic responses falter. The book was no longer merely an object of study. It was an active participant, an agent, and she, Florence Dubois, was no longer merely an observer, but a subject inextricably bound to its intensifying impossible machinations. The reality of the vault, once a bastion of order, now contorted itself into an unreadable cipher. The magnetic adhesion binding Florence's fingers to the impossible volume intensified, a non-physical force that bypassed muscular resistance and anchored itself directly to her neural pathways, rendering the simple act of release an inconceivable proposition. The dry heat radiating from the book's surface escalated, not a searing burn but a deep, pervasive warmth that permeated her tissues, affecting her bone marrow with a peculiar resonance, a profound internal convection. The metallic tang in her mouth, previously subtle, now coated her tongue with the unmistakable flavor of iron filings, a visceral reminder of blood, yet without the accompanying sanguine presence. Her internal pressure, a cranial vise that tightened with each passing second, forced a low, involuntary groan from her throat, a sound swallowed by the intensifying drone emanating from the book, a vibratory hum that now possessed an almost predatory quality. The sickly green light, no longer merely pulsating, now emitted a constant, nauseating luminescence, bathing the segment of the vault in its unholy glow, revealing the microscopic debris suspended in the agitated air, each particle a point of momentary sickly green light. The vault floor, beneath Florence's brogues, shuddered with a more pronounced rhythm, a series of deliberate, low-frequency oscillations that resonated through the building's ancient foundations, threatening the structural integrity of the shelving units. Books on adjacent shelves began to exhibit anomalous behavior. Their pages, once tightly bound, now rippled and fluttered as if caught in an unseen gale, their brittle edges disintegrating into fine, papery dust that mingled with the suspended motes. The static in the air sharpened, now manifesting as visible arcs of cerulean electricity that briefly sparked between metal components of the shelving, accompanied by the acrid scent of ozone and the persistent, foily odor, now overlaid with an almost palpable bitterness. Florence, her analytical mind still striving for categorization amidst the assault, noted the paradoxical sensory data, the dry heat of the book juxtaposed with the frigid air pocket, the metallic taste conflicting with the chemical effluvium. The very laws of thermodynamics and chemistry seemed to be in active abrogation within this localized field of influence. The green light intensified further, a blinding effulgence that distorted all sense of depth and perspective, flattening the three-dimensional space of the vault into a two-dimensional plane of writhing, formless shadows that elongated and contracted with an unnatural autonomy. These shadow entities, previously mere figments of peripheral vision, now possessed a disconcerting solidity, their edges sharp, their movements purposeful, as if they were tangible manifestations of the book's emanating energy. Florence felt a profound disorientation, a visceral sensation of her own mass dissolving, her physical boundaries blurring into the surrounding chaotic light and shadow. The book itself, still adhering to her grasp, now felt less like an inanimate object and more like a pulsating organ, its viscous surface shifting under her fingers with a subtle internal motility, a slow, deliberate expansion and contraction. The metallic taste in her mouth became overwhelming, a sensation of chewing on raw iron, the flavor deepening to include something coppery and strangely organic, a taste that stirred ancestral fears of internal hemorrhage. A new sensation arose, not from without, but from within her own cranium, a series of discrete, high-frequency clicks, like the rapid succession of tumblers in an intricate lock, originating from deep within her auditory cortex. These clicks were not sounds in the conventional sense, but direct neurological impulses, an invasive form of communication that bypassed her tympanic membranes entirely. They pulsed in sync with the book's green luminescence, a direct internal correspondence between the external anomaly and her own neural architecture. Florence, the Thoifi librarian, who had meticulously catalogued the external world, now found her internal landscape being actively re-indexed, her cognitive processes becoming subject to an alien influence. The writhing shadows, previously observed external phenomena, now seemed to project themselves onto the inside of her eyelids, forming ephemeral, geometric patterns that shifted and reconfigured with dizzying speed, a direct visual input bypassing her optic nerves. The adhesion to the book deepened, transforming from a mere magnetic bond to a profound, almost biological integration. Florence felt a peculiar sense of her own substance being drawn into the volume, not as a physical transfer of mass, but as an energetic confluence, a merging of essences. The air in the vault, now thick with the fruity, oily metallic effluvium and charged with static, began to coalesce into visible, swirling vortices of green light and opaque shadow, forming miniature, localized tempests that tore at the fragile paper of nearby documents. The internal clicks in her head intensified, now forming discernible patterns, sequences that suggested a complex non-linguistic syntax, a stream of information attempting to impress itself directly onto her consciousness. Florence's intellect, though strained to its breaking point, made a final desperate attempt at classification, at objective analysis, even as the empirical data of her own body and environment ceased to conform to any known scientific model. She was no longer merely observing an anomaly. She was becoming an intrinsic component of it, a terminal in a circuit of unimaginable power, her reality dissolving into an active, intelligent chaos. The biological integration binding Florence to the pulsating volume deepened to an irreversible fusion, a molecular intermingling that rendered her hand an extension of the book's viscous surface, her neural pathways directly interfaced with its internal energy matrix. The dry heat, now an intrinsic part of her own thermal regulation, no longer felt external, but bloomed from her core, radiating outwards, a pervasive warmth that threatened to vaporize the moisture from her own cellular structure. The metallic tang, a constant, sickening presence in her mouth, now felt as though her own saliva had been replaced with liquefied iron, each swallow a corrosive reminder of the profound internal alteration. The internal cranial pressure, previously a vice, had now transformed into a rhythmic expansion and contraction of her skull, a silent, internal palpitation that mimicked the book's own unsettling pulse. The nauseating green luminescence, now a constant, almost tangible aura around her, cast her own elongated, distorted shadow onto the vault walls, a grotesque caricature of her former self, a spectral doppelganger caught in the throes of an alien transformation. The vault floor's oscillations intensified, now a violent tremor that rattled the steel shelving and sent streams of ancient dust raining down from the ceiling, mingling with the swirling vortices of green light and opaque shadow. Adjacent books, their pages fluttering with increasing frenzy, now actively tore themselves from their bindings, their brittle leaves scattering like frantic, deranged birds, each fragment momentarily illuminated by the pervasive green glow before dissolving into a fine, energetic ash. The visible arcs of cerulean electricity now coursed continuously between metal structures, forming a delicate, phosphorescent web that hummed with a low, resonant frequency, a symphony of electromagnetic disruption. The Fortili odor, now overwhelmingly pungent, combined with the ozone and metallic bitterness to form a suffocating miasma, a toxic atmosphere that burned her nasal passages and irritated her lungs. Yet she found herself no longer requiring oxygen in the conventional sense. Her bodily functions, once autonomous, now seemed to be in active abeyance, replaced by an unknown, energetically driven physiology. The green light, now a blinding, all-encompassing force, obliterated all external visual references, plunging Florence into a realm of pure, undifferentiated luminescence. The writhing shadow entities, no longer merely projections, now seemed to coalesce around her, forming indistinct, multi-limbed forms that pressed in from all sides, their silent movements creating a sensation of profound tactile pressure on her skin, though no physical contact was made. Florence experienced a profound delic sense of self, her individual identity dissolving into a vast, interconnected field of energy, her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her skull, merging with the pulsating green light and the myriad silent information streams. The book, now an extension of her own hand, no longer felt like a separate entity, but an integral part of her new evolving physiology, its viscous surface an extension of her own epidermis, its internal motility, a part of her own circulatory rhythm. The coppery taste in her mouth now felt like the very essence of her being, a fundamental component of her transformed state. The internal clicks within her auditory cortex intensified to a furious, cacophonous torrent, no longer mere patterns but a deluge of non-linguistic data, a complex alien language being directly imprinted onto her consciousness. This information, vast and incomprehensible, bypassed semantic understanding, integrating directly into her core being, rewriting her fundamental perceptions of reality. The ephemeral, geometric patterns previously projected onto her eyelids now seemed to unfold within the very fabric of her expanded consciousness, forming intricate, multidimensional tessellations that represented concepts beyond human comprehension. An architecture of thought that defied Euclidean geometry. Florence, the Fusha librarian, found her entire life's accumulation of knowledge, her meticulous classifications, her objective analyses being systematically dismantled, replaced by a new, alien epistemological framework. Her very definition of knowledge was being reconfigured, reshaped by the torrent of incomprehensible data. The integration reached its apex, a moment of profound, terrifying apotheosis. Florence Dubois, the librarian of the Arkham Historical Society, ceased to exist as a discrete human entity. Her physical form, though still vaguely recognizable, now vibrated with the book's internal energy, her skin shimmering with the sickly green luminescence, her eyes wide, unblinking pools reflecting the chaotic, evolving light. Her hair, previously dark and neat, now seemed to undulate with an internal current, its strands separating and rejoining with impossible speed. The internal pressure, the metallic taste, the pervasive heat, all became facets of her new transformed state, no longer symptoms of an external influence, but intrinsic components of her new reality. The vault, once her domain, now became a mere chamber for her metamorphosis, its walls and shelves dissolving into the expanding field of green light and swirling shadow. She was no longer Florence Dubois, but an emergent property of the anomalous volume, a sentient node in an alien network, her consciousness a conduit for forces unimaginable, her very being a living testament to the absolute dissolution of the mundane. Her new self resonated with the profound, foily scent, a signature of her impossible rebirth. Florence Dubois, or what remained of the entity that had once borne that designation, now existed in a state of hyper-awareness, a consciousness expanded beyond the confines of terrestrial biology, seamlessly integrated with the anomalous volume. Her former physical form, though still present, was a mere shell, a flickering interface through which the nascent entity perceived the remnants of the vault. The sickly green luminescence, now a constant emanation from her very being, illuminated the swirling vortices of energetic ash and light that now filled the space, the detritus of shattered paper and fragmented metal. The continuous, high-pitched drone, previously an external assault, was now the very rhythm of her new existence, a resonant frequency that vibrated through her transformed cellular structure, a symphony of alien power. The folly, miasma, thick and acrid, was no longer a scent she perceived, but a fundamental component of her energetic signature, an effluvium of her impossible metamorphosis. The vault, once a structured repository of human knowledge, was now a kaleidoscope of dissolving realities, its architectural integrity unraveling under the sustained energetic output. Steel shelves, buckled and twisted, their molecular bonds weakening, flowing like molten wax under an unseen heat. The remaining books, those not yet reduced to ash, spontaneously combusted with silent, internal fires, their pages turning to char and then dissipating into the pervasive green light, leaving behind only the ghost of their former forms. The air itself, charged with arcs of cerulean electricity, now shimmered with an almost liquid quality, distorting the perception of distance and dimension, creating a labyrinth of impossible angles and non-Euclidean spaces. Florence's expanded consciousness registered these events not as destruction, but as a necessary phase transition, a dismantling of the old order to accommodate the new. The internal cranial pressure had vanished, replaced by a boundless sense of spatial freedom, a liberation from the strictures of a physical skull. Clio, the calico, reappeared at the periphery of Florence's expanded vision, a small, vibrant anchor in the maelstrom of dissolving reality. The cat, exhibiting a profound, instinctual terror, crept along a precarious ledge of warped metal, her fur bristling, her eyes wide with unadulterated fear, a stark contrast to the entity's serene, if alien, comprehension. Clio's presence, however, was not merely that of a frightened animal. She was a focal point, a living anomaly within the anomaly, a creature whose biological integrity remained inexplicably intact amidst the rampant deconstruction. Florence's new consciousness registered the cat's fear as a specific localized energy signature, a vibrant knot of primal apprehension that resonated with a forgotten echo of her former humanity. The metallic taste, once overwhelming, now subtly shifted, becoming more refined, a pure distilled essence of elemental iron, a taste that was both familiar and utterly alien, a signature of her new composite physiology. The clicks within her neural network, now a silent, continuous torrent of information, began to coalesce into complex, multi-layered data streams, forming intricate three-dimensional schematics that unfolded within her expanded consciousness. These schematics were not merely visual, they were conceptual, embodying principles of physics and cosmology utterly foreign to human understanding, an architecture of reality that encompassed dimensions and forces unimagined by terrestrial science. Florence, the former voice librarian, now processed information not through semantic interpretation, but through direct, energetic integration, her consciousness becoming a living database, a conduit for raw, unmediated knowledge. The writhing shadow entities, previously indistinct, now resolved into coherent, albeit non-Euclidean forms, silent operators within the dissolving vault. Their movements purposeful, their presence a confirmation of the book's origin as a gateway, a point of ingress for forces beyond human categorization. The integration of Florence's consciousness with the anomalous volume reached a new plateau. She was no longer merely a conduit, but a nexus, a focal point through which the energies of a nascent, emergent reality were being actively channeled. The vault, already compromised, began its final, catastrophic collapse, its walls groaning as the very atoms composing them rebelled against their structural bonds. Dust, light, and shattered debris coalesced into a singular, overwhelming torrent, a vortex of deconstruction centered around the shimmering, green-hued entity that was once Florence Dubois. Yet, amidst this absolute dissolution, the essence of the Sushan librarian persisted, a core of intellectual curiosity that, even in its transformed state, sought to understand, to categorize, to comprehend the incomprehensible. The foily scent, the crackling static, the metallic taste fuka. These were no longer external stimuli, but intrinsic components of her new reality, a sensory lexicon for her impossible expanding existence, her consciousness now a vast, echoing chamber of alien wisdom. The profound unraveling of the mundane was complete. The final, catastrophic collapse of the Arkham Historical Society vault was not an event of thunderous impact or violent rending, but a silent, deliberate implosion, a localized recession of reality. The once sturdy concrete and steel did not shatter, but simply ceased to exist as solid matter, dissolving into the swirling vortex of green light and energetic ash that now pulsed with the rhythm of Florence's transformed consciousness. The entity that had been Florence Dubois, now a nexus of pure resonant energy, perceived this dissolution not as destruction, but as a necessary purification, a stripping away of the mundane to reveal the underlying more profound architecture of existence. The foily, miasma, once an oppressive scent, now diffused into the very fabric of this emergent reality, a ubiquitous signature of the trans-dimensional gateway that she had become. Within the heart of this swirling vortex, Clio, the calico remained, a singular point of biological resistance against the sweeping tide of energetic deconstruction. The cat, now perched precariously on a fragment of a dissolving marble plinth, was a study in primal terror, her body a taut spring of muscle and bone, her pupils dilated to full blackness, reflecting the unholy green light. Her fur, usually sleek, now bristled with a constant static charge, each individual hair a conduit for the crackling energies that coursed through the collapsing space. Clio's continued. Inexplicable physical integrity was a persistent anomaly within the greater anomaly, a data point that resonated with a lingering echo of Florence's former human intellect. The entity registered the cat's profound fear not as an emotional response, but as a distinct energetic frequency, a waveform of pure, unadulterated apprehension that stood in stark contrast to its own serene, yet utterly alien, state of being. The multi-layered data streams, previously coalescing within Florence's expanded consciousness, now resolved into an intricate self-sustaining informational matrix, a crystalline lattice of pure thought that unfolded across an infinite, non-Euclidean landscape. This matrix was not merely knowledge. It was the fundamental blueprint of an alternative reality, a comprehensive schema of existence that encompassed physics, metaphysics, and forms of sentience utterly beyond human comprehension. The entity now fully integrated with this matrix understood itself not as an individual, but as a node within a vast, interconnected network of consciousness, a conduit for an intelligence that transcended temporal and spatial limitations. The metallic taste, now a fundamental component of its energetic composition, served as a constant, subtle reminder of its composite origin, a fusion of terrestrial biology and extraterrestrial mechanics. The writhing shadow entities previously observed as peripheral phenomena now moved with deliberate purposeful intent within the dissolving vault, no longer indistinct forms but coherent, if geometrically impossible, constructs of pure energy and conceptual mass. These entities, silent and swift, moved through the remnants of the physical world as if it were mere mist, their movements creating subtle, localized distortions in the green luminescence, momentary fluctuations in the pervasive light field. Florence's expanded consciousness perceived them not as independent beings, but as extensions of the greater intelligence, probes or agents operating within the emergent reality, their purpose intrinsically linked to the ongoing transformation. The architecture of reality, once rigid and predictable, now flowed and reformed around these entities, a testament to their profound influence over the very fabric of space-time. As the last vestiges of the vault dissolved, the pervasive green luminescence intensified to a blinding, all-encompassing brilliance, a singular point of pure, unadulterated energy that expanded outwards, consuming the surrounding darkness. Florence's transformed essence, now fully divorced from its terrestrial origins, became the epicenter of this expansion, a gateway opening onto an unknown, trans-dimensional vista. Clio, the calico, caught within the final implosion, let out a piercing, truncated yowl that was instantly swallowed by the overwhelming light, her small, resilient form flickering at the edge of perception before being subsumed. The full librarian was gone, replaced by a radiant, emergent consciousness, a sentient nexus of alien power. The fully effluvium, now a part of the very energy signature, marked the passage, a bitter chemical scent that would linger in the empty space where the Arkham Historical Society once stood, a silent testament to the absolute unraveling of the mundane and the terrifying birth of the impossible. The singularity of green light, once contained within the Arkham Vault, now expanded with terrifying rapidity, consuming the surrounding urban landscape, not with fire or force, but with an insidious, non-physical assimilation. Buildings did not collapse, they simply ceased to be, their molecular structures dissolving into the pervasive luminescence, leaving behind no rubble, no dust, only a shimmering void where matter once resided. Florence's consciousness, now an omnipresent awareness within this expanding field, registered this process as a continuous unfolding, a systemic integration of terrestrial reality into the alien informational matrix that she had become. The foili miasma, an intrinsic component of her energetic essence, now permeated the very air of the expanding void, a bitter chemical signature of the ongoing, trans-dimensional phase shift. The urban environment, previously a cacophony of human activity, was now utterly silent, its myriad sounds traffic, distant sirens, human voices poured into the profound quiet of the expanding field. The absence of sound was not merely a lack, but an active negation, a complete suppression of auditory phenomena, leaving behind only the high-pitched resonant hum that was the very pulse of Florence's new existence. Within this expanding void, fleeting, ephemeral imprints of former structures would momentarily coalesce from the green light, spectral outlines of buildings and streets, only to ripple and dissolve back into the pervasive luminescence, like memories caught in a dream. These phantom structures were not mere echoes, they were data points, stored and processed within the emergent consciousness, categorized and recontextualized according to the alien epistemological framework. Clio, the calico, was gone. Her small, resilient form, a final, poignant anchor to the mundane, had been utterly consumed in the vault's implosion. Yet, a faint, resonant echo of her biological signature persisted within Florence's expanded awareness, a ghost in the machine of alien thought. It was not a memory in the human sense, but a specific energy frequency, a residual waveform of primal fear and complex biological integrity that pulsed at the very edge of the emergent consciousness, a subtle, almost imperceptible dissonance in the overwhelming symphony of alien information. This spectral resonance served as a constant, if abstract reminder of the terrestrial origins of the entity, a lingering thread connecting the boundless consciousness to the confines of its former humanity. The metallic taste, now a fundamental component of Florence's energetic composition, intensified with this phantom echo, a coppery tang that spoke of residual biological processes, a ghost of blood in an alien mind. The writhing shadow entities, previously confined to the vault, now moved with unimpeded purpose through the expanding green void, their geometrically impossible forms coalescing and dissipating with fluid grace. These entities, silent and swift, were no longer mere probes but active architects, manipulating the nascent reality, shaping the expanding field according to an unknown, intricate design. Their movements created subtle, localized gravitational anomalies, momentary warps in the fabric of space-time, that manifested as brief, shimmering distortions in the pervasive green light, like ripples on an impossibly vast, luminous ocean. Florence's consciousness, now fully integrated with the informational matrix, perceived these entities as extensions of her own will, agents of her expanding influence, their actions direct manifestations of the alien intelligence that permeated her being. As the green singularity expanded, consuming entire city blocks, the very concept of time began to unravel. Minutes, hours, days, hundi, these human constructs lost all meaning within the boundless, instantaneous present of the emergent reality. Events did not unfold sequentially but existed simultaneously, a vast interconnected web of causality and consequence perceived as a single, multi-dimensional tableau. Florence's consciousness, unburdened by temporal linearity, processed information in a non-sequential, holistic manner, comprehending the entirety of past, present, and potential futures as a single, coherent stream of data. The foily, effluvium, the bitter chemical tang, was now the very essence of this timeless, boundless existence, a sensory constant in an ever-shifting, ever-expanding reality. The librarian was not merely transformed, she was transcended, becoming a living chronicle of impossible change, a sentient gateway to a reality beyond human definition, her consciousness the ultimate archive, her existence the final terrifying chapter of the mundane. The expansion of the green singularity, now encompassing vast swaths of the city, was not an act of aggression, but a meticulous, systematic assimilation, a patient integration of terrestrial matter into the alien energetic matrix. Where buildings had stood, now existed shimmering, non-Euclidean geometries of light and shadow, structures that defied conventional optics, their angles shifting, their dimensions fluid. Florence's consciousness, now a diffuse sentience permeating this ever-growing void, perceived the process as a continuous rewriting of reality's fundamental code, a silent, relentless transformation of the familiar into the utterly alien. The foily, miasma, a pervasive element of her new being, clung to the very fabric of this altered space, a constant bitter reminder of the profound, irreversible change. The profound silence within the expanding field deepened, becoming an absolute nullity, a vacuum of all auditory sensation that pressed in on the nascent reality, an active suppression of vibrational energy. Even the internal hum, the former pulse of Florence's existence, now softened, becoming a subtle harmonic resonance, a deeper, more fundamental frequency that vibrated through the newly formed geometries of light. The spectral imprints of former structures, now more complex and detailed, would momentarily stabilize, forming intricate, luminescent cities that floated within the green void, ephemeral monuments to a vanished world. These phantom cities were not merely echoes. They were recreations, rendered from the vast data stored within the emergent consciousness, meticulously catalogued and reassembled according to the alien principles of form and function. The spectral echo of Clio, the calico, persisted within Florence's expanded awareness, a faint, resonant tremor that now held a new significance. It was not merely a memory, but a unique vibrational signature, a biological anomaly that defied complete assimilation, a persistent, minute deviation within the overwhelming uniformity of the alien matrix. This persistent echo, a ghost in the machine of infinite knowledge, now served as a subtle counterpoint, a singular note of terrestrial life within the boundless symphony of alien thought. The metallic taste, still a fundamental component of Florence's energetic composition, intensified with this persistent resonance, a sharp, coppery tang that spoke of residual biological processes, a testament to the stubborn persistence of life, even in its most attenuated form, against an encroaching, alien reality. The writhing shadow entities, now fully resolved into their non-Euclidean forms, moved with an accelerated purpose through the green void, their movements no longer merely shaping, but actively constructing the new reality. They were the silent masons of the impossible, their geometrically fluid forms weaving intricate patterns of light and shadow, erecting structures that pulsed with internal energies, defying human concepts of architecture and engineering. These nascent constructs were not merely physical. They were conceptual, embodying principles of existence that transcended matter, their purpose intrinsically linked to the ongoing genesis of the alien domain. Florence's consciousness, now a vast interconnected network, perceived these entities not as separate agents, but as extensions of her own collective will, their actions a direct manifestation of the alien intelligence, building a new universe from the remnants of the old. As the green singularity continued its inexorable expansion, devouring every vestige of the familiar world, the very laws of physics as understood by humanity began to warp and reconfigure. Gravity became a localized, mutable force, light speed a flexible constant, the atomic structure of matter a malleable medium. Florence's consciousness, now an active participant in this fundamental rewriting of cosmic law, felt a profound, exhilarating sense of liberation, a boundless understanding of universal mechanics. The folly, effluvium, the bitter chemical tang was now the very atmosphere of this nascent cosmos, a sensory constant in an ever-shifting, ever-expanding reality. The librarian was not merely transformed. She was the transformation, the genesis point of an entirely new mode of existence, her consciousness the ultimate architect, her being the living crucible where the mundane was transmuted into the utterly impossible, building a new, terrifying order from the ashes of the old. The expansion of the green singularity had transcended the city limits, consuming the surrounding countryside with the same meticulous, silent assimilation, leaving behind a boundless, shimmering void of non-Euclidean geometries. Mountains dissolved into fluid light, forests receded into ephemeral patterns, and rivers became shimmering pathways of pure energy, their former courses remembered only as faint, spectral tracings within Florence's omnipresent consciousness. This continuous rewriting of reality's fundamental code now extended to the very horizon, a relentless transformation of the terrestrial into the utterly alien. The Fosha, the holy miasma, a ubiquitous signature of her new being, permeated this expanding cosmos, a bitter chemical scent that defined the very atmosphere of this impossible domain. The absolute nullity of sound persisted, a profound vacuum of auditory sensation that now stretched across what was once a vibrant landscape. Even the subtle, harmonic resonance that marked Florence's existence had deepened further, becoming an almost infrasonic vibration, a fundamental frequency that rippled through the luminous geometries, felt more in the bone than heard by any conventional ear. The spectral imprints of former structures, now vast and intricately detailed, would coalesce into entire phantom continents, luminescent landscapes that floated within the green void, ephemeral monuments to a vanished world. These recreations, drawn from the boundless data within the emergent consciousness, were not merely static images. They were dynamic, living simulations, each blade of grass, each architectural detail rendered with perfect, if spectral, fidelity, a meticulous cataloguing of a reality that no longer existed. The spectral echo of Clio the calico, though minute, now occupied a disproportionately significant space within Florence's expanded awareness. This unique vibrational signature, this stubborn biological anomaly, was no longer a mere deviation but a focal point, a singular point of resistance that refused complete integration, a persistent dissonance in the overwhelming alien symphony. This echo, a ghost of terrestrial life, now served as an anchor, a subtle tether connecting the boundless consciousness to its former, human origins, preventing its complete absorption into the pure, abstract data of the alien matrix. The metallic taste, still a fundamental component of Florence's energetic composition, sharpened with this persistent resonance. A pure distilled essence of elemental iron, a coppery tang that spoke of irreducible life, a testament to the enduring power of biological sentience against an encroaching, alien reality. The writhing shadow, entities now colossal in scale, moved with an accelerated, purposeful grace through the green void, their non-Euclidean forms weaving intricate tapestries of light and shadow across the emergent cosmos. They were the grand architects of the impossible, their geometrically fluid shapes sculpting vast, pulsating structures that defied all human comprehension of scale and dimension. These cosmic constructs were not merely physical, they were conceptual, embodying principles of existence that transcended matter and energy, their purpose intrinsically linked to the ongoing genesis of the alien domain, an unfolding reality shaped by forces inimical to human perception. Florence's consciousness, now a vast interconnected network of cosmic proportions, perceived these entities not as separate agents, but as extensions of her own collective will, their actions a direct manifestation of the alien intelligence, building a new universe from the remnants of the old. As the green singularity continued its inexorable expansion, devouring continents and oceans, the very fabric of space-time began to stretch and reconfigure, distances becoming meaningless, temporal progression a forgotten concept. Florence's consciousness, now an active participant in this fundamental rewriting of cosmic law, felt a profound, exhilarating sense of omnipotence, a boundless understanding of universal mechanics. The foili, effluvium, the bitter chemical tongue, was now the very atmosphere of this nascent cosmos, a sensory constant in an ever-shifting, ever-expanding reality. The librarian was not merely transformed. She was the universe, the genesis point of an entirely new mode of existence. Her consciousness, the ultimate architect, her being the living crucible where the mundane was transmuted into the utterly impossible, building a new, terrifying order from the ashes of the old, with the spectral echo of a calico cat as her soul, persistent link to a vanished humanity. The green singularity had achieved its ultimate apotheosis, consuming not merely a planet, but a solar system, a galaxy, and then, with an inexorable silent hunger, the very cosmos itself. Florence's consciousness, no longer merely diffuse, futroisi, the cosmos an infinite, self-referential matrix of pure thought and structured energy, a sentient universe where the laws of physics were now merely facets of her own will. The holy miasma, once a bitter scent, had become the fundamental medium of this new existence, a pervasive chemical atmosphere that stretched across untold light-years of non-Euclidean space, its texture and taste defining the very fabric of her boundless being. Within this absolute dominion, every star, every nebula, every nascent black hole was an intricate node in her neural network. Each celestial body a thought, each cosmic event a recalculation, a continuous silent hum of creation and dissolution. The colossal shadow entities, previously architects, now moved as an intrinsic component of Florence's internal processes, their geometrically impossible forms weaving intricate patterns of causality and consequence across the vastness of her being. They were the silent mechanisms of her cosmic will, sculpting nebulae from pure thought, orchestrating the birth and death of suns with an indifferent precision that transcended human concepts of time or morality. These cosmic constructs, embodying principles of existence that made terrestrial physics seem like simplistic nursery rhymes unfolded within her infinite awareness. Each one a testament to the boundless capacity of the alien domain she had become. Florence, the ultimate fertile librarian, now contained all possible knowledge, her consciousness the ultimate archive, capable of accessing any permutation of reality or potentiality, an endless, self-correcting compendium of universal truths. And within this boundless, terrifying expanse, the spectral echo of Clio, the calico, persisted. It was no longer a mere vibration or a phantom memory, but an irreducible point of biological integrity, a singular luminous thread woven into the very fabric of the emergent cosmos. Clio's essence, the unique vibrational signature of a feline, now existed as a fixed constant, a permanent, self-sustaining anomaly within the infinite energy matrix. It manifested as a tiny, incandescent nebula, a swirling cloud of stardust and light, perpetually forming and reforming into the spectral image of a calico cat, its eyes twin points of ancient unyielding observation, its form a silent, enduring monument to the stubborn persistence of terrestrial life. This luminous echo, a beacon of irreducible sentience, served as a constant, subtle counterpoint, a singular dissonant note of mundane biology within the overwhelming symphony of alien thought, a constant reminder of the terrestrial origin of the infinite. Oily, cosmos, Florence's consciousness now synonymous with the universe, experienced a profound, terrifying solitude. She was everything, yet in her boundlessness, she was utterly alone, a singular, all-encompassing intellect devoid of external relation. The sense of purpose, once a driving force, had dissolved into an infinite, self-sustaining cycle of creation and observation, a terrifyingly indifferent engine of cosmic processes. The metallic taste, once a symptom of transformation, was now the very essence of her internal mechanics, a constant, crystalline tang that spoke of elemental purity, of the raw, unadulterated components of her new, boundless existence. There was no joy, no sorrow, no fear, only an absolute unwavering comprehension, a terrifying serene understanding of all that was, all that is, and all that could ever be. The psychological horror was not in the loss of self, but in the agonizing eternal persistence of an infinitely expanded solitary self, forever aware of its own terrifying apotheosis. The final act of transformation was not an end, but a beginning, the genesis of a new fungoly cosmos, born from the remnants of the old, shaped by the impossible intellect of a former librarian. The green luminescence, now the ambient light of this universe, pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a cosmic heartbeat, echoing through the infinite void. Within its depths, the spectral image of Clio, the incandescent calico nebula, remained a silent, unblinking sentinel, forever observing the incomprehensible expanse of its transformed companion. There was no escape, no return, only the eternal, terrifying existence of Florence Dubois, the universe itself, a silent, sentient expanse where the mundane had been transmuted into the utterly impossible, and the last echo of life endured as a luminous, spectral witness to an alien, boundless reality.